Well, relaxing is difficult these days, and it really takes work, is what I'm finding. Even for me, I've been meditating a long time, and I'll notice myself just sort of getting tense for no particular reason. Probably something weird going on the other side of the world is sending those vibrations over here. So
Yeah, we are interconnected.
yeah,
The effects.
yeah. Couple things. We're going to talk about the surrender, acceptance, and action. So the we've talked about this. I did a session on surrender and acceptance, and how they're two very different things, and how that relates to mindfulness and the compassion exercises. Been watching. People don't know about this film. There was a documentary made 2010 or 15, something like that, called The Corporation. And it was a group of people who studied the economic, social, political impact of corporations. It was pretty, very well done. I mean, it was just, it was a very skillful documentary in the sense that they let the story tell the story. So what they did was they just told the story. And it's clear as day what's going on. And then they just came out with one called The Corporation 2, the unfortunately necessary second corporation film. And it's really quite stunning because it really explains a lot about the origin and the dynamics of what's going on the planet and why it's going on and that sort of thing. And I just had a conversation with a friend of mine about these sorts of things, so it really is a nice dovetail. But it reminded me there's certain things that we just will not be able to change. And that's really important to know what those are. So that we can apply all of our energies to something that does some good. As I said before, it's not so much about the people who are here now, it's the next generation that we need to be addressing our efforts to, that we can plant seeds now that, because it's, it's, oh gosh. I think of, Terminator, the first Terminator film, well, all three Terminator films are based on the bad guy in all those films really was Skynet. It wasn't the Terminator; it was Skynet, which was it's like basically they didn't have AI at the time. It was basically the AI of the day in Skynet in Terminator films. Got to the point where it made a decision that these human beings are going to wreck everything. We need to get rid of them. So, and which is not a far-fetched premises. So it's like today I wanted to look up something about enlightened action or contemporary organizations that are working to better the planet or working with compassion or whatever. So I typed in enlightened activity. I got these detailed instructions of how to load shells into a tank faster in this particular war game, computer game. The whole page. And I'm thinking, that right there is a sign of the times. In the sense that enlightened activity is like how to blow up more cannons in your computer game. So the activity part that we'll talk about today is really, really important. And I think we spent one session too on how to discern what we can do, what we can change and what we can't change. Because, like I said in one of the people of a good conscience and warm heart got a real hard time today because there's so much shenanigans going on, a lot of malarkey going on, a lot of people getting hurt, and these huge projects are really just not. They look there or they purport to helping people or whatever, and they're not really. They're not there to benefit the greater mass of people. So it's important to know what we can change and what we can't change. And then sometimes what it comes down to, maybe next door neighbor or my kids or something that, and then we apply all of our energy and our attention and our focus on the people like right next to us. And so that's it's an important thing, because we this is a theme that we come to quite often, which is well, if we don't change something, there's even an article in the New York Times about this, about that rage or a sense of anger about the way things are going is a problem. In other words, that's sort of on the rise from a mental health perspective, and it's really dangerous in the sense of we can't sustain that for very long. We begin to break down. It begins to harm us to be that outraged at what's going on that is outrageous. Understanding that we can't be of much service to anyone else if we're not taking care of ourselves. So it's like, first we have to maintain our own composure and our own balance and grow in wisdom and compassion. So how do we do that when what's happening is so outrageous we can't do anything about it? It leaves us in a real ethical dilemma and emotional turmoil. And we can't just say, oh, okay, well, I can't do anything about that and put it in the corner. That doesn't work. We've got to go and do something, whatever it is. And, whether it's, finding a home for a couple of wild boars, or starting doing some meditation classes, or, whatever it is we do. So it's important to know what that's about. And I think about Thich Nhat Hanh sometimes in this regard. He was 19 years old, Vietnamese monk, during the worst of the Vietnam War. I've mentioned this a time or two, where there's a little documentary, it's only about 20 minutes long, on YouTube, called A Cloud Never Dies. And it's about him. And something I didn't realize about his background was that he saw the worst of the war, the effects of the war in his country, in the middle of his country, and I think he was exiled or he left or something at some point. But what I realized was, and what comes through in the documentary, is that he had to intensify his practice immensely in order to deal with the enormity of the suffering that he was surrounded by, the people and the country that he loved and cared for, and doing that just it's just an amazing. I mean, when looking at his talks and stuff that are still around on YouTube and such, he had the epitome of the composure or the presence of wisdom and compassion. It just seemed to be constant with him. And he was even asked in an interview with Oprah Winfrey, this was a long time ago, I think it's still out on YouTube, she says, well, how often do you meditate? Do you meditate every day, and for how long? He says, I meditate all the time. So I think that's one of the reasons he got to this place where, what's the point of meditating and not meditating? I'm meditating, I feel better, and then I go out and then act in a very non-meditative way and get all caught up in the foibles of the world, and I come back and meditate, try to straighten things out again. Why not just stay in meditation? There's pretty good reasoning there, I think. So the enlightened action is really the theme of today, and to be honest, I'm not sure which one of the many exercises would be appropriate with that, so I'd probably do something with a compassion exercise, and as usual starting with mindfulness. But the mindfulness in a very real way is essential element and the foundation for any action. particularly enlightened action. Meaning that if we're really aware of what's going on within us, and whenever we're anxious or doubtful, we pause, and we're considered in our responses, and not given to high ups and low downs and that sort of thing, and treating each moment and each day as it arrives. That's really a tremendous act of compassion toward ourselves. In other words, we become less and less affected by and more immune to the foibles of the world, and so that we can maintain our own personal, mental, emotional, spiritual integrity. So the mindfulness component is very important, because we begin to respond. The more attention we pay to our basic nature, our true nature, the more intuitive we are in responding to the world. It's not that we don't think about what happens, or what to do. We don't, but we'll sit, and we can sit and go, I wonder what the right thing is to do here, and that's a wonderful place to be, because almost always we get the right answer, and it's not something we could have arrived at intellectually. In the mindful process of the mindfulness meditation, equanimity develops, and that's really important too, because it helps us modulate our outrage at some of the things that are happening. And we can just say, oh, that's really outrageous, and move on. We don't have to get sucked into it and take it on, put on the VR goggles about how terrible it is, and that sort of thing. So we can look at it in a compassionate way, and I was really puzzled by this when I first encountered the idea that, and the teachings are about compassion, are that because compassion is passionless. In other words, it's not doesn't get wrapped up in anything. It doesn't take sides, but it's it's like parents seeing their kids growing up and knowing that they're trying to learn something. It's hard for them to learn, but they can learn it. So you let them make their mistakes, and they're going to learn from them. You teach them how to learn from their mistakes, and that's an act of compassion. And that's sort of like what's going on here. I mean, we have some big lessons to learn, and it hasn't gotten bad enough yet for the majority of people to go, oh, I think I see what you mean. There's only a few people, relatively few people, the innovators and the early adopters, who really understand what's going on and how severe it is. So with the mindfulness component helps us to make a space for this kind of compassion, these dynamics of compassion. So it's very different than Bill Gates wanting to go out and create something that could bring clean water to all these communities out there that don't have infrastructure and have terrible drinking water and stuff. And I saw a documentary on it. He committed, I think it was $25 million, and commissioned 5 companies or something like that to submit plans. And it was a total failure, because the cheapest they could do per unit was $10,000. So for communities that don't have 2 nickels to rub together, that's totally impossible, unless somebody wants to donate that, which apparently he did not want to do. That's more about sympathy, or maybe even empathy. It was his wife really drove, she was the inspiration for all that. She said, we got to do something about this. So it wasn't really compassion, in my opinion, driving that. It was really, more sympathy, or some flickering of conscience, which was good. But they didn't really look far enough. Okay, what really is the problem? It's not just the fact that they don't have the ingenuity or the engineering, or they don't actually have a commode that could function without a larger infrastructure. So when we're really practice, in my opinion, when we really practice mindfulness on a regular basis, we we're less apt to make those kinds of errors and more apt to get involved with our local library or, whatever it may be. And we become better at helping out our friends, our family, and community in that way. And so that's the first part. And the key practice in mindfulness is the letting go, is the surrender part. Because in a sense, what we're doing every time a thought comes up, we want to grasp onto it and think about it, and this is good, this is bad, how am I going to, and all that. And we actually have to surrender our will to that is jumping out to get involved with that, and we go, okay, and we let that go entirely, and we just let go of the thought. So it's an act of tiny act of surrender over and over and over and over again. So what that surrender does is sort of empties us of, let's say, ill-conceived drives and thoughts, and the more that we eliminate either those thoughts and drives or be able to better interrupt them when they occur, then we're much better able to say, okay, how we become able to be more concerned about others, because really when thoughts come up in our mind, that's really self-concern. So when we're involved in self-concern, the rumination of we're trying to fix our faults or ruminating over some grief or some transgression, it really hampers or eliminates our ability to be compassionate toward others. So mindfulness prepares us in a very well-rounded way to be able to have a foundation for compassion and the tools to be able to foster and nurture the presence of compassion in our lives. So when we do that, we can accept things like enormous transgressions in the sense of it is the way it is, and what can I do about it? Or how can I, what role can I play to make this world a better place? Those kind of questions, we'll get answers for them. So the first part is the letting go of judgment, criticism, and the intellectual mind trying to figure stuff out. And we go, okay, this is present moment awareness. Let's go of all that, and to our what we think needs to be fixed in us and all that, and our all that stuff. So, and then we get, there's the surrender going on, then the acceptance. Then the way I look at that is both our inward acceptance of our characteristics that we may or may not like, but the things that are within us that we want to develop, and or problems or trauma that we've had, or mental, emotional, and physical challenges that we've had. Also, out in the world, accepting things just as they are. And when we do that, it allows us to have the ability to be at peace with things that are going on, even though we still have good conscience about it. In other words, we're not shying back from it at all, or giving up in any way. But it helps us say, okay, this is real. This is really what's going on, and it is not good. And to be able to know that. So, and what that does when we do that, that's what drives us into compassionate action. Because it's like, I don't know about this, and I don't know about that, and that's too big for me to deal with, but I know about this. So what about that? So I had met with a friend of mine. I've known her and her husband, this gal and her husband, for a long time, and she's really big on prison reform. So I thought that's really interesting, because I've done some volunteer work in the Dallas County jails and stuff, and so I see how pitifully insufficient It is. So anyway, we really hit it off. I mean, we had a lot of the same ideas about how it came to be, why it is that way, and what to do about it. And that's for some reason that was what she wanted to take on, as a reform of the prison systems. That's where, because the injustice is happening, it's the same illness, but it's applied to different areas, like agriculture, education, manufacturing, democracy, politics. It's the same problem, but it's in all the different areas of our communal life. Now, I didn't really want this to be a bummer talk, but that's kind of the way it is. But the thing is, it doesn't matter where you start. In other words, a lot of people think, oh, we need to do this and we need to do that, and it all needs work. But each of us, being a unique being, have the capacity for a unique contribution, whatever that is. And then we do that, and that's what's called for. And we're helping in some way. And at some point we begin to connect with other people who feel the same way, and we'll be part of the tribe that's left over after Skynet. And so I'm tired of talking. So yes, Taylor. Love, compassion is passionless. In that sense, yes. Yes, exactly. It's what we do here, is to figure out what to do next, because it is beyond the point of just meditating to relax. Now that's number one. We have to learn how to regulate our nervous system. But after that, then what? And that's what really was the impetus for this series a long time ago. It's like, okay, what's next? What do we do? Now that I'm relaxed and I'm full of compassion, what do I do? And so that's really kind of the theme for today. And Pope Francis, I mentioned this last time, I think, too, gave a TED Talk shortly before he died. And he said, politics is the highest form of service. Which I thought was, we never really, we talk about democracy all the time, but don't really think about it as a means of service and how to serve the needs and the well-being of the country or the people and that sort of thing. And he's absolutely right. And unfortunately, we're living in an era of politics is being dismantled. But we go forth with a good conscience and a warm heart and do whatever it is we can. So might as well get started on saving ourselves and saving the world. It's sort of like, and I thought of this too, and this is maybe too biblical a reference, but I don't know, too biblical a reference, but a kind of biblical reference. In a sense, when we're connecting with others, what we're doing is building an ark, in a sense. A community of people who know how to survive and why we survive and how to connect and how to work together to do that. Okay. So I guess we'll start the process of practice, finding a comfortable position. We'll see what happens. And settling down just like the bell settles into silence. And as we do that, letting go of the thoughts, the flutters of our mind for about the future or the past. And allowing ourselves to sort of sink into this present moment awareness. And whenever a thought or emotion arises, simply recognizing it and releasing it, and coming back to the present moment. And as we do this, our mind may be more insistent, and that's okay. That's not unusual for that to happen. We just, a thought, and let it go. And even though more thoughts may pop up, we find we may be able to let them go as they arise. And recognizing the thought as a thought, being able to distinguish between a thought and reality, so to speak. That's in quotes. And letting it go and coming back to the present moment. Allowing ourselves to settle in a place of equanimity, of relaxed awareness. I need each moment relaxing more into just being. And getting a sense of our entire nervous system just settling down. Because for the next little while, there's nothing we need to fix or figure out. And allowing ourselves to be as aware as we can of this space that seems kind of timeless, this present moment awareness. ourselves to just sit in the middle of our life. And allowing it all to just be as it is. And in this space, allowing compassion to flow in whatever form it seems to appear. Compassion for oneself as light or warmth or glow, whatever. White light, however it appears. And doing our best to welcome it into every part of our being, our body and our mind. To the point it fills us completely. Every single part of our being. There may be some specific things that arise for which we need to be compassionate toward. That's okay. And absorbing this compassion as best we can. Allowing it to fill us up in every space and aspect of our being. And bringing to mind perhaps a person or a situation, wherever has a calling and calls out to your heart, the compassion in your heart, whether it's in our personal lives or someone you just saw on the street or institutions or whatever it may be. Whatever it is that the compassion within you is being called to be aware of. and seeing what arises. And allowing the overflow of the compassion for ourselves stream out to this, whatever has come to mind, person, being, system, planet. And finding a connection there in terms of the compassion, the desire to relieve suffering, and the need for compassion out there. And allowing ourselves to recognize, acknowledge, and accept that connection. And extending our compassion without reservation. And then finding this, if it's not entirely clear, that's okay too, but feeling a reciprocity, even if we don't really quite know yet, but extending the compassion out there into the world, knowing that it's fulfilling some needs somewhere. And that forms our connection with that aspect, that part of the world. And perhaps realizing that this is simply a natural connection of life to life. and allowing this connection as best we can. The natural reciprocity between us as an individual and the world and others. And sensing the fullness of this relationship now established. A direction and an idea, connection. Holding that in this present moment awareness. And allowing everything to sort of settle in. As we come to a fullness and a close of the exercise. Allowing the body to absorb it like a sponge absorbs water. Grounding our experience in our very being. So that when the bell rings again, you can bring this with you as you go about your day and come back to it at any time.